where does Hideo Kojima get his ideas? In this podcast, we take a deep dive into his brain and shed light on his creative process. Hideo Kojima presents Brain Structure.
こんにちは、小島秀夫です。ポッドキャストプログラム、Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure.
Hello, I'm Hideo Kojima, here with the podcast program Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure. Today, I'm here again with my partner for the show.
Hello, Brains here. Today, we also have a guest, Director Mamoru Oshii.
どうも、こんにちは。
Hello, nice to be here.
You two haven't seen each other in quite some time, correct?
6年ぶり。
Around 6 years, I think.
Have you known each other very long?
Around 26 years or so. I came to Tokyo in 1996, not too long after going through the Kobe earthquake. At that time, I was making a game called Police Knots, and when we were working on the Sega Saturn version, Mr. Mamoru Oshii and I met and had our first conversation. After that, we became friends. At one point, Mr. Oshii called me up and said, "I'm with Cameron in America, and we're going to go shoot some guns. Do you want to come with us?" At that time, I couldn't go though, but that's what our relationship has been like for 26 years.
By Cameron, do you mean James Cameron?
はいはいはいはい。
Yes. I wish I had gone with them, but I couldn't get out of work. After I became independent in 2016, I went to go see Mr. Oshii and we had a meal together, but we hadn't seen each other since then. At that time, actually, we had a plan for Mr. Oshii to come to my studio and get a 3D scan done of him so he could appear in Death Stranding. But he had a broken bone at that time, so I didn't get to see him. After that, he did an interview for us, but I couldn't fit into my work schedule, so it has been 6 years since we've seen each other.
なかなか機会が
We weren't able to make time, and then the pandemic happened, so it really has been quite a long time, hasn't it?
まあ、押井さんのでも本とかはじゃあ
I've read Mr. Oshii's book, though, like The Essence of Film, The Law of Sequels.
Only available in Japan.
You're embarrassing me.
Although I'm sure many of our listeners are already aware, I'll take this opportunity to introduce Mr. Mamoru Oshii. In 1983, he directed his first film, the original movie adaptation of the TV anime, Urusei Yatsura. After directing his second movie, Beautiful Dreamer, he became a freelancer. He worked as the visual storyboard designer and director for Mobile Police Pet Labor, from its OVA, original video animation era, to its first film adaptation, Mobile Police Pet Labor the movie, and its sequel film, Mobile Police Pet Labor 2 the movie. In 1995, Ghost in the Shell became popular overseas, and its sequel, Innocence, was the first Japanese anime to be nominated to compete at the Cannes Film Festival. In 2008, The Skycrawlers was nominated to compete in the Venice International Film Festival. Mr. Kojima, how would you describe Mr. Oshii?
押井さんはどんな方僕が
I mean, what can I say? I think he's really well respected around the world. Of course, I watched Urusei Yatsura when it aired on TV, so I was aware of him from the point already, but I really became a fan during the OVA era. Do you know what that is? Original video animation. VHS videotapes. I was already involved in the game industry, but at the beginning, I was staying in a boarding house and was watching VHS tapes. That's when I first encountered Mr. Oshii's mystery article file, 538.
これびっくりしました。
I was really surprised. It probably couldn't be aired on TV at that time, but the OVAs of that time period were really gritty and Mr. Oshii became known throughout the world. The story was like Angel Heart. Of course, I love films, and I'm sure Mr. Oshii loves films too. European films like Trier and Melville, and other examples like Angel's Egg and Stalker. There weren't really any other anime out there like that. At the time, I didn't have a VCR and couldn't watch Angel's Egg or Dallas, but I started with his mystery article movie and was really impressed by the Pat Labor movie series. I really admired him. I couldn't believe there were anime like that, a visual feast focusing mostly on thrill and suspense without the robots as the main attraction. French and European films have a similar feel, right? That first scene with Motoko and Ghost in the Shell is like one of my favorite movies, Melville Samurai. I mean, Avalon is basically Anjay Vita. Avalon is live action film that I really love. The aesthetic is really great. It's a little presumptuous of me to make a commentary on it, but things really changed before and after Mr. Oshii's animation style. I mean, Disney's Snow White was a full animation.
もうカメラフィックスでもずっと動いてるんですけど
Even when the camera is fixed, things are constantly moving. That was impossible to do with Japanese hand-drawn animation. With hand-drawn animation, you can do camera blocking. And with Hayao Miyazaki, he was very particular about movement, like the character's actions running up a wall diagonally or how the waves roll with the wind. But with Mr. Oshii, he's aware of cinematic camera work and layouts, like his lens work with that really distorted fisheye lens. Even Hideaki Anno imitates it. I bought Mr. Oshii's book, The Patlabor Method. At the time, I was working on adventure games and we couldn't move the camera around in that medium. Now you can do longer camera work with CG, but at the time you couldn't. I think Mr. Oshii was the first person to really consider layouts and storytelling. And Mr. Oshii likes films that has worked on anime and live-action movies, and he's even written novels. I like films, but decided to make games, and that's why I think my work is a bit unique. Similarly, Masaki Yamada, for example, is a novelist, but got his start in films. Katsuhiro Otomo is the same too. He started with an interest in film and then began drawing anime. Nowadays, people grow up watching anime, then make anime. Or they grow up playing video games and then make video games. That's the difference. I think it was really a fight with Mr. Oshii to make his work. For me too. People would say, anime is bad education, or you can't do this in anime, or it's different from movies. But Mr. Oshii fought and finally made it through, ultimately creating a new culture. And now his work influences other creators all around the world, and that is really impressive. RoboCop 2 copied him. That scene at the end of Patlabor. And the Wachowski sisters have copied everything too, and so did Guillermo.
いや、それパクったって言っちゃうと、
People will get mad if you call it copying.
オマージュ
An homage then.
Maybe inspired by or with respect is better. I mean, if you call it copying, then animation is all made by copying live-action films.
そうですねゲームもそうですけどね
Yeah, so are games.
まあゲームってさ、それアニメーションの歴史を
Video games follow a similar path as animation, but at a higher speed. Any new media is a form of entertainment. Animation really took off after World War II and has continued to develop in the decades that followed. It copied and absorbed a lot of things before creating its own original style. But games did the same thing in about 30 years' time. The technology developed really fast. I really feel that looking at the NES system. Games evolved very quickly, and the structure of the industry and expression as a whole have really changed too. I think games as a form of entertainment are going to continue to change dramatically. Now, everything is becoming mobile. Only the very serious fans have stationary game consoles, right? I've played games since the NES system, and the work that Hideo has produced has changed quite a bit since the Policenauts era. His ambition hasn't changed, and neither has his outlook or his choice to go in hard with the tiniest of details. But the way he expresses these things has changed. With each of his releases, it has changed. I was really surprised when he released The Phantom Pain, and now recently with Death Stranding. I really feel that change. The reason changes happen in a person has a lot to do with individual effort, but I feel that it also really moves in sync with the changes in media. Of course, you always need to work within your media's parameters. It's the same with both anime and games, like budget, for example. Anime in particular, if I'm going to be honest, is always a battle with the budget.
ゲームも予算取る
It's the same with games.
いやそうだけどほら
The amount is different though. There are probably 2 more zeros in a game budget compared to an anime budget. I've never worked on an animation that had a budget surplus. Maybe Innocence? But the rest were really budget battles, so you really have no choice but to do your best with composition. You have to try to create actuality and reality through expressions. The realism of a fantasy world is lost when you move things around in animation. Ironically, the more you move, the more it feels fake. So I decided not to animate a lot of parts.
But that only works because it's your anime and you make it work. You go see an anime because it's moving animation, only to find that yours doesn't move.
A special type of knowledge is necessary to make a movie that can be expressive without much movement. You work with composition. That usually requires layout or camera work, and sound too.
Yeah.
You can't compete in the movie industry without doing that. I didn't particularly love anime, I was just a movie guy. Like you said earlier, Melville, Tarkovsky, etc. I had a huge admiration for European movies. And through that admiration, because I'm a movie guy, I just happened to start working in an animation studio.
タルコフスキーでうるせえやつらありえへんじゃないですか。
It's hard to get urusei yatsura from Tarkovsky.
やっぱ楽団となるわけでね。
A guy who talked about names like Godard was suddenly working in an animation studio doing Yatta Man. I didn't know what to do. I was doing all of that while thinking about what I would do if I was the director. I learned a lot, but you need the technology. I'm sure it's the same with games, but you can't express or do anything without the technology there. The first 3 years, I had my hands full with just learning everything. And then I started thinking about how I could bring some part of myself into animation. I couldn't figure out how to make it my own or how to express myself in my movies. I wasn't sure what to do. I needed people to help me. But most animators in the industry are generally super conservative.
職人だからさ。
They are craftsmen, after all.
いやいや、それはもうゲームもそうですよ。
It's the same in the gaming industry.
やっぱ技術だって
I guess experts in a field have the tendency to become conservative. They have pride in their work. So when you try to do something a little bit different, you stir up conflict. But people on the sound team are often willing to try something new. People working in the sound industry are constantly encountering new things, trying to find the true sound of something, or searching for something interesting to do. They simply want to have fun. The people who make art tend to be introverted. It's not really in their nature to try making something as a team.
ここ重要なところですからね。
That's a pretty big issue.
だから基本的にまずは現場との戦いなんですよ。
There are a lot of battles when you work in animation. You battle with sponsors too.
It's usually those on the inside that first reject new ideas.
So there is a lot of resistance? How do you combat it?
それはそれぞれなんです。
Everyone has different temperaments, so you have to change your battle style each time.
なだめたり
Calming them, coddling them, flattering them, getting angry at them, threatening them.
おしさん
When I first got to know Mr. Oshii, he invited me to come see him work on this sound remix thing for Pat Labor 1 and 2. Mr. Oshii was there alone that day in this huge studio, and when I listened what he was working on, you know, in games and anime, do you know what rendering is? When there's a scene involving rain, you can't just draw the rain. Even in live-action films, you can't really see the rain. Akira Kurosawa made the rain black, actually. Anyway, when rain starts pouring in real life, you know. You know that rain is falling, but in movies or anime or games, you can't process a lot of rain in real time. So what you do is, you add sound. You add the little sound of rain. They did that in Pat Labor. They emphasized the sound of each raindrop. When you remix a scene with the sound of the rain on the roof, the whole environment feels different. Mr. Oshii remixed it very precisely, and I do that with my games too. It's that sort of thing that makes Mr. Oshii really special. He just builds up all the tiny details.
Is it tedious work?
まあいや実は結構面白い。
It's more interesting than tedious. Sound engineering gives you a lot of bang for your buck. If If you want to try something new, it usually doesn't take a lot of money to do it. Recording the source sound may cost a bit of money, but when you mix the tracks, if you take your time, you can really close in on the sound you imagined. For example, Skywalker Sound in San Francisco has about 100 times the number of sound sources than Japan does. And if you ask them to record something new, they'll do it right away. In the Skycrawlers, we needed the sound of a Porsche. But not just any Porsche. We needed a specific Porsche sound. And we went looking for it and recorded it on the spot. We also needed the sound of Basset Hound nails. Making sound is something you can do pretty quickly, and the results are immediate. But animating something takes a lot of money. You can successfully make sounds in a lot of different ways, depending on how you approach it. It really is very quick. When I have the opportunity to, I do radio dramas. You can make them very quickly. If you write a book, you have your product in hand in no time. It's a really cost-effective way to produce something.
まあゲームもそうなんだけど、日本の映画って
In a similar fashion, well, I suppose you could say the same about video games too, but Japanese movies don't want to spend money on sound production. Even if it's a huge project, they try to pull it off in a week. Animation usually does sound in about 2 months, and we set aside the budget so the money doesn't accidentally get spent somewhere else. Or if we have an advertising budget, we would forcefully steal from them or do other bogus stuff. If you don't plan it out like this, it becomes a budget battle. What will we spend the money on for this project? If you really want to use Skywalker sound, you'll need to cut costs from somewhere else.
僕も行きましたけど、もう全然環境からちゃいますからね。
I went there once, actually. The whole place was crazy. I saw it and thought, great things can be made here. The lunches and everything were crazy too. Like, what the heck is this?
そうそうそう。まあもう入ってからスタジアムで
Yeah, after you enter the front gates, it takes like 15 minutes by car to get to the actual studio. But at that kind of place, you can shut out everything else and focus on your work. It's the ideal environment. It's the same for movies and for games. Creating something special is a social act. It's a form of business. Beyond just the realization of the work, you have to gather together money from all sorts of people, and you have to make more money with that. If you don't succeed, you can't make your next piece. So the conditions for success as a director are very clear. And in order to make your next work, you need to meet those conditions. There isn't any more to it than that. If hundreds of thousands of people watch your work, or if it turns out to be a big failure, if you lose once, it's over. Well, in Japan, it isn't quite that harsh, but that's definitely how it works in Hollywood.
思いっきり売れたらあかん。
And you can't be too successful either.
You can't?
You just want for your work to do fairly well. If you're too successful, you'll start to be approached by certain types of people and you'll find yourself in a tough place.
大成功するとね、
Yeah, if you're too successful, then you'll face tremendous pressure to become even more successful.
おしさんね、昔
You know, back in the day, I made the adventure game Police Knots. Mr. Oshii, you also love adventure games and made one too. Sansara Naga, right?
と恥ずかしながら
I'm a bit embarrassed to admit it.
I met him when I was making an adventure game. And then I made Metal Gear, and I really didn't think it was going to do that well. And it flew off the shelves, and Mr. Oshii was like, Hideo, you can't make something like that.
He told you that? Mr. Oshii did?
いや作っていいんだけどね
I mean, it's fine to make something like that, but if you're too successful, you'll run into a lot of problems afterwards. You'll need to keep outdoing yourself to be more and more successful. You'll have to keep raising the quality to match the changing technology. And you'll have to compete with other games. A game that goes viral like that can actually be a big stumbling block.
Yeah, and it's hard to get around that block.
It was actually similar with Pat Labor, too. It was fine when we did the first and the second one, though, because the number of people on the project really didn't change. But the budget doubled.
あれ予算倍やったんですよ。
It doubled.
ゴースト・イン・ザ・シェルって
And if I remember correctly, the budget increased 4 or 5-fold between Ghost in the Shell and Innocence.
イノセンスはでもすごい
With Innocence?
いやあれはだから確かなかった
The number of people working on that didn't really increase much. There were about the same number of people working on both the Skycrawlers and Innocence. The promotion budgets for each were hugely different, though, and that's what I had to deal with. But that's the movie industry for you. It's easiest if they only have medium-high hopes for you, and you only promise medium-high success. It's true mentally, too. If you don't have all that pressure, you feel more freedom to try experimenting a bit. The producers all say the same thing, to appeal to your former audience while also acquiring a new one. And the reality of it is that you'll lose both audiences. I've seen it happen a lot, so I know. It's really the gate to hell for creators.
だからそこそこのラインですよ。
It's a difficult line to toe. You can't end up in the red, but don't want to be too far in the black and lose your freedom. It's especially hard if you do well in Hollywood.
だからさキャメロンがその一番いい例です
James Cameron is the prime example. He made a record-breaking hit, and then he went beyond even that. That's the kind of man he is. As a creator and as a businessman, he has the strong will to succeed. He's a prime example of a Hollywood person. He went from making Titanic to making Avatar and just continued to rewrite himself. People will expect more from him each time. And now it's been 8 years since his last work. But I'm sure he'll do it again eventually, though.
But they're planning to do like 4 or so Avatar movies, right?
だって何本もやるって話でしょ
Seriously, how many do we need? Does he really want to end his career as the director of Avatar? If it were me, I wouldn't want to. There are directors like that in Japan too, stuck making the same series and not able to break free. One person that certainly has been requested to play the sequel game is Hayao Miyazaki, but he's never made a sequel for any of his works. I wrote about that in my book too. Why does he...
You talk about that in your book, The Essence of Film, The Law of Sequels.
だからさ結局ね
Ultimately, you'll either have to play the sequel game or you'll have to refuse to make sequels entirely. Some people can do that. Some people can't.
僕はメタルギアずっと
I worked on the Metal Gear series for so long, but it was truly something I wanted to make. And as long as there were fans, it became my reason for living, kind of like an athlete. Athletes and astronauts, they all start with a goal like, I want to go to outer space, or I want to win a gold medal, right? And when they start winning, they gain the support of fans and they can't break free. They can't break free, they can't quit, they can't lose. It felt like that when Metal Gear started gaining fans and I started getting fan letters. I kept working on it for a while, but for better or worse, I eventually went independent and couldn't work on it anymore, so I stopped.
あとやっぱ基本的にさ僕
I hardly ever make my own stories for my work. Jobs come to me with the original work already made, and I try to do them justice. That's the good part about being a movie director. You use other people's money and other people's ideas, so in the end, who's responsible for the project? But that's also one of the more questionable elements of being a director. You borrow all this stuff from other people and sew it together. So if you want to make excuses, you have a lot to choose from. If the movie tanks, who takes responsibility? There are the producers and also the company employees. Who's working on the project as freelancers? Well, that would be the directors and the animators.
じゃあ自分がさ責任取るんだったら
So my stance is that if they want us to take responsibility, then they should just let us do what we want. But the ideas come from them, so we start to lose our will to create something on our own. I think that's something everybody misunderstands about me. I'm not really doing what I want to do. These jobs end up on my plate, and it's up to me to figure out what to use, how much to toss out, how much to add in, which characters to cut, and all that. And we edit the movie like this, similar to how movie translation works. While translating things, they start adding elements of their own into it. That's really the most questionable part about being a director, but it's also the most fun.
Hideo Kojima presents Brain Structure.
Although the conversation is nowhere near complete, we are going to end today's episode there. You can look forward to listening to the second half next week.
ということで早くもエンディングのお時間です。
Now it's time to wrap things up. Mr. Oshii was very interesting, wasn't he? Far too interesting. I hadn't seen him in 6 years, and there was the pandemic too. It was great having him on the show. We should probably go out for dinner soon. I like to have him over at the studio, and there are a few things I like to consult with him on too. I think he has a lot of international fans, so I'm sure everyone enjoyed hearing what he had to say. And that's it for today's episode of Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure. We look forward to seeing you next time.
それではさようなら。
Hideo Kojima presents Brain Structure is a production by Spotify Studios in association with Kojima Productions and Fam Inc. Brains, Kayleen Falls. Narrator, Owen Maki. Music, Silent Poets. Visual design, Mechikuro. Producer, Hiro Furuki. Director, Kohei Takizawa. Executive producer at Spotify, Asami Sekine. Special thanks to Kojima Productions, Ayako Terashima, Masafumi Chiba, Miki Suga, and Aki Saito. Hosted by Hideo Kojima.
Still listening? Can't wait for part 2, right? We'll bring it to you early next week. On the next episode, Mamoru Oshii, like you've never heard before. The fun talks continue and non-stop laughter from Hideo Kojima.
Where does Hideo Kojima get his ideas? In this podcast, we take a deep dive into his brain and shed light on his creative process. Hideo Kojima presents Brain Structure.
はい、こんにちは、小島秀夫です。ポッドキャストプログラム、Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure.
Hello, it's Hideo Kojima with the podcast program, Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure. And here's my partner.
Brains here. I'm happy to join you again today, Mr. Kojima. Today, we are continuing our talk from last week with our guest, Director Mamoru Oshii. Let's jump right in.
Mr. Oshii, have you considered becoming a producer too?
いや、やらないね。
No way, no way.
I want you to feel my pain.
いや、だからそれは絶対やりたくない。
I definitely don't want to. It's obvious, just looking at James Cameron. You probably end up using 60% of your energy on just being a producer.
そうですね。
That sounds about right.
You can't focus on directing?
Well, in my case, producing isn't just about production. You have to deal with the employees and with making a company. It's hard to put into words, but I thought that once I became independent, I'll be able to make a movie. At first, everyone wants to be like Mr. Oshii, being a freelancer and really only working with a lawyer and accountant. I wanted to do that, but I realized I needed to get together about 100 people if I wanted to make a great CG. And then you plan a project, make presentations, and try to find a team that can take on the job. But you can't just point to a team and be like, this one. That's what Pixar does, though. But I can't do that, so I had to make my own company and get an office and gather people. And then I thought, great, I've done it. And people come to me with plans about movies, but in reality, I can't do it.
Because you're holding the fate of too many people in your hands, and those people have lives too?
I can't just be like, whoops, sorry about last year. That's the scariest part of it all.
So you can't make movies?
社員の給料払わないといけない。
I need to pay my employees, you know.
経営者になるって
That's what happens when you become an executive.
You should try it too.
No, thank you.
惜しいプロダクション。
Oshii Productions. I want to join too.
But technically, I do have my own company, but it's more of an independent business run by just me and my wife. We talked about getting rights and contracts and such, and even discussed turning it into a studio. But I definitely didn't want to do that. I've seen what has happened with Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli.
I see.
If I did that, there's too much I would be forced to do. I'd lose my way, not knowing if I was doing something because I wanted to do it or because I had to keep my studio afloat.
一本だけやりましょう。あ、これかみたいな。
Like, let's just squeeze in one more project here. Oh, no. Is this what we're doing now?
いやあのさ
No, thanks. Also, I really didn't want to deal with all that annoying stuff and socializing all year round. Now, once every 3 or 4 years, I'll get blessed with a fun job, and that's when I deal with socializing. They're all just mercenaries, really. I gather them together to complete a certain mission, and once it's over, they all just go their separate ways. That's just the way I've always done it, so I haven't really considered forming my own official army for a fight. I haven't trained for it, and I'm really just satisfied with my position as director. Also, animation studios are really all shoestring operations. They're constantly searching for producers to fund their projects.
いないですよ。
But they don't exist. That's why I decided to become one myself. I've been through a lot in this industry. They won't tell me the budget, and release dates get announced out of the blue. Or they would suddenly spill the contents of a project during promos. Once they totally gave away spoilers in a magazine interview.
And you didn't even know all the content yourself?
No, それに近い部分あるよね
That's what it's like with producers. They're absolutely necessary to bring projects into the world. They gather and distribute the money. But as a producer, you need to come to the realization that you may never really understand everything about the project or the people making it. I mean, I don't think I've ever met a producer who has read through the whole screenplay. It's like, why don't you get it? Why did you okay this? They're just focused on whether the project feels right or if they can escape responsibility.
いやいや、逃亡する人。
Yeah, they run away.
There are producers that do that?
Yeah, there are.
あいっぱいいるよね
There are a lot out there, actually.
But they're the producer.
逃亡というかね。
They run away or they won't meet with you. They'll be like, sorry, my schedule is too busy. Or, I think I killed someone. I mean, how many people are you going to kill? Recently, someone's whole family had an accident or something on the very day we were going to meet. And then the next time, they had broken a bone. They won't come to the set either and will only meet in cafes. Someone always dies or they catch some sort of illness.
Honestly, producers are the type of people that can make things happen with just a phone call, so all they really need is a smartphone. These days, they'll stop responding to emails. That's the most common pattern. I've only dealt with around 100 producers, but there aren't any out there that have lasted for more than 10 years. Well, nobody except Ishikawa from Production IG. But Ishikawa is pretty much a con man.
ピー入れときましょう。
Maybe we should censor this. Just bleep it out.
Because of his persuasive skills?
いや要するに人たらしなのよ
He can make anyone love him. People say that about me too, actually, so when we're together, we're both just trying to con each other, telling each other lies and learning about each other in the process.
人形使いですね。
Like in the Puppet Master.
Well, if you both know you're telling each other lies, that's also one way of communication. If you believe the lies, then it's over. If you believe them, you'll get betrayed or abandoned. But the answer is pretty simple. just don't believe them. Refuse to work until you've seen the money, or use other tactics like that. And be careful who you introduce to them. They'll absolutely treat freelancers and employees differently, and they'll refuse to meet with you directly. And if you keep calling them, your trustworthiness as a director will suffer. Producer-director relations are the first hurdle to overcome as a director. But it's a skill that is absolutely necessary, especially as a freelancer. But now that I think about it, I've always been a liar myself.
Really? Well, I guess all creators are liars, aren't they?
I had no problem telling lies even when I was a kid. I was really shy. And I'm only able to talk with people now because it was a necessary skill for me to learn upon becoming a director. Anyways, if you need any evidence, ask my wife. She 100% doesn't believe anything I say.
Is it okay to air this?
それ外だから大丈夫。
It's fine. She won't listen to this anyway. She knows everything about me. If you start a relationship thinking, I won't be tricked, then the relationship goes pretty well. Because you don't believe anything the other person says. I think relationships aren't about loving each other or trusting each other. You both have to profit somehow, share values, or maybe you just can't escape each other. When I was playing Death Stranding, I realized that I was probably the worst person in the world to play Death Stranding. Because I don't want to connect with people.
だっておじさんオフラインでやってた。
Mr. Oshii, you even went as far as to only play it offline.
Yeah, I played it offline. I think I played around 250 hours. And then I got frustrated and busy and I stepped away from it. Once you step away from a game, it's hard to pick it up again. But I really enjoyed the game, Death Stranding. If I were to put it into my own words, I think video games are a device to discover how people play. They never play exactly the way the creator intended. People come up with new ways to play. That's the best part of it. So when I heard that you'd play as a porter in the game, it made perfect sense to me. I've played a lot of open-world games, but I've hardly played the story part. I kindly declined all the missions too.
歩いてるだけとか。
You just walk around then.
だから散々さ走り回ったわけ。
Yeah, I just ran around everywhere, leaving my deliveries behind and just walking around. I tried going to the very top of mountains. I liked running along the coastline. The scenery was really unique. One thing that I thought was really cool about the world was that suddenly you could just feel the presence of death everywhere. After that thing gets defeated, it turns into a human hand-shaped mushroom. When you run around with that fetus in a pod, it's like you're straddling the line between life and death. It's always raining too, so it really feels like you're in the underworld. It really hooked me. At the beginning, I couldn't figure out how to ride the motorcycle. You know, they're kind of just there. I kept trying to figure out when I could ride the motorcycle, but it never happened.
充電しないといけないですよね。
You have to charge it.
Well, I couldn't figure out how to make a charging generator.
If you're playing offline, you have to make it yourself.
Yeah, and you have to make your own highways and your own zip lines and stuff. It's a lot of work. And when it rains, things start rusting pretty quickly. At the beginning, I stole a mule truck and ended up running my business on that truck.
見るとなんか
Mule trucks are not really good vehicles.
そうそう性能悪いしすぐ錆びるしさ。
They're not good and rust easily. But they're nice because they spawn pretty regularly. And because mules have so many stuff, they're really good to raid. I tried playing the game by repeatedly raiding mules. And I'd take a break by running around the mountains or along the sea.
Don't do that. Please play the story.
I am interested in the story. The story is really elaborate and detailed. But I'm sorry, I only follow the story on YouTube.
これな皆さんそういう
Please, everyone, don't do that.
あんまりおすすめできないんだけど。
I can't really recommend it either.
Mr. Oshii says that you should play offline and just watch the story on YouTube.
Most people don't finish the game, right? Maybe 50 or 60 hours? I'm pretty stingy, so I want to get the most that I can out of the game.
でもストーリーやら
So you should play the story.
だからキャラクターに興味があるからさ
I like the characters, so I do want to interact with the characters more. Now that you mention it, the characters in Death Stranding disappear one by one, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
A character that I wanted to interact with more was Fragile. Who else should I interact with? It's a pretty lonely world. I interacted with BB quite a bit. I liked swinging the BB. Actually, I've been playing Fallout 4 for about 5 years, and I've probably logged around 4,000 hours on it. When you play something that much, you pretty much run out of things to do. I've completed all the missions, done all the stories. The only thing that I haven't done is join a faction. So all I did was run around. But it felt like I enjoyed that experience again for the first time in a while, running around with a baby, and the ground is really unsafe.
足元を見るゲームだ
You have to watch your feet in the game.
足元めちゃくちゃ悪いから
The ground is really awful. You slip around a lot. At the beginning, you died like right away.
Sorry about that. Everyone dies there. It's where you learn the basic controls.
It's a game where you really die a lot. So I thought that's why it's called Death Stranding.
No, that's not it. But I want people to forget that the character is not the hero for a moment. That's really important in the game. Usually games are different from real life. You can fly, run at high speeds, get really powerful. A lot of people grew up on those kind of games, but this game is the opposite.
In the trailer, you see Porter written on his shoulder, right? So I get it. Like, oh, this Porter is the main character.
The blue-collar guy.
In other words, he's not really an interested party. It really felt like your work, Hideo. Not a character who infiltrates the enemy and fights like Metal Gear, though. This guy's just a porter. He's the one who's going to connect all the people. That's really interesting. I thought it'd be the perfect game to run around like crazy in. I got really proficient at it. Actually, there's one thing I wanted to request. The reward system felt pretty weak, I thought.
あ、面白い
Ah, the rewards.
だってさ
All you get is a shower or a Monster Energy drink. So when I played the game, I stored up on Monster Energy drinks from the supermarket. If you drink them while you play the game, you really get into the right frame of mind. Midway through the game, you get your hands on some beer too, but then you drink too much and start acting crazy in the game. You break stuff and go crazy, right?
You break the camera too.
So I wondered, what does this person find rewarding in all of this?
なるほど
Oh, I see.
作るったってせいぜいトラック
And you can't make stuff. You can make a lot of trucks. And you can make a rifle, but you aren't supposed to kill people with it. I really wondered how far you would take it. In Fallout 4, you could kill a lot of people. I mean, if you didn't like how someone talked, you could just blow their head off. The way you get your pleasure in this game is really different. You build highways and zip lines, and the scenery keeps changing, so you really get sucked in. But the maintenance after you build things is really a pain. Everything starts rusting right away. That's why I gave up and started to run around. But that was pretty fun, too.
Thank you.
前半のマップでの行ってないとこないと思う
I don't think there's anywhere on the map that I haven't visited. I really just ran around everywhere.
In Director's Cut, there are a few new places.
I saw that. This time I think I'll try playing the PC version.
Follow the storyline this time.
If possible, in the PC version, I want someone to make a mod. I want to try playing as Fragile.
なるほどね僕の口からは言えないですね
I can't really say that.
でもさそれは言えないと思うんだよ
Of course you can't. But if you played the game as Fragile, it'll be an entirely different game, wouldn't it? I really liked her as a character. I actually really liked that actress even before the game. Even amongst European actresses, she's kind of unique, right?
She's working on Doom Part 2 right now, and Emmanuel after that. She really challenges herself with different roles.
She's even played a Bond girl. She seems to want to try everything.
She's not motivated by money. She doesn't do anything that she doesn't want to do. If that wasn't the case, she wouldn't have worked on my project.
But she's not really your ideal type of woman, is she? I figured out what your ideal type is.
すいません。
You have?
メタルギアの時から全然変わってないから。
It hasn't changed since all the way back during your Metal Gear days. Your ideal type of woman has a certain look.
My favorite actress played Amelie.
Amelie was a little suspicious from the very beginning, wasn't she?
いや、もうこれ以上言わない方が。
Hey, don't go any further than that.
出てきた瞬間はなんかこの人。
From the moment Amelie appeared on the screen, you're like, she doesn't seem quite right in the head. People who create things, they can't hide their fetishes. Especially a creator who does everything themselves. The fetishes really show up in female characters. Fragile was really a unique character in that sense. I was like, where did she come from? I've always wondered.
Lea Seydoux was on my radar right at the time when I was developing Fragile's character.
So which came first?
I couldn't say. I wasn't sure if Lea would agree to do the job, so it was pretty difficult. And then there was that strike. When we were in the middle of negotiations and waiting for a reply, suddenly everyone was going on a strike.
ハリウッドのストライキ。
Ah, that Hollywood strike, right? But that's what made it fun to look forward to.
もうおじさんはもう全部見てますよ。
Mr. Oshii, you see and understand everything.
What do you think about Mr. Oshii playing your games to this extent?
Really, I'm very honored.
It's about time to wrap up. With the two of you here together, and with both of your amazing work, it makes one wonder. Is there any chance of you working on something together?
なんか一緒にですか？
Something together? Should I be your producer?
いやいや、とんでもない。
No, not that. We're both directors, and the people change, so it's hard to make lasting friendships. Because we have a certain level of distance from each other, though, we've been able to remain on good terms. If we did something together now, I think things might get heated.
But if our roles were different, it'll probably turn out all right, wouldn't it?
Things never work out when two directors go head to head. Our experiences and types of work have been quite different. I've only made 3 games, and they were pretty worthless. So I guess you could say that Hideo's and my territories have been different enough that we haven't had to go up against each other. I don't think it would work out well. Our relationship is built on respect. It's a little embarrassing to say that. Like with James Cameron. Although I haven't met with him for a while, there were times where we hung out quite a bit, but we never competed against each other. I never overly idolized Hollywood. I'm an anime director, and I'm a totally different type of person. James is totally different. Therefore, we got along pretty well. I don't think I've seen him since I went to see the filming of Titanic. So we haven't really interacted since he got fat.
てか多分リンダ
I don't think I've done anything with him since he and Linda Hamilton got divorced. It's really hard for directors to stay in contact.
僕一回だけありましたけど。
I actually met him once, James Cameron.
He's a bit of a pain, isn't he?
I don't know if I'd say that. He was pretty knowledgeable about video games.
Because he's a nerd. He respects you, Hideo.
Actually, I'm on pretty good terms with Guillermo del Toro. Am I allowed to say this? There was a time when there was this idea of making a drama, and I was called by this big producer. And Guillermo was there too. And he asked me if I wanted to work on it with him. I was like, that's fine, but if we work on something together, things will definitely get heated. And Guillermo was like, that's true, then for episode 1, I'll direct the opening, and you'll direct the rest of the story. For episode 2, you'll direct the opening. And I was like, what kind of nonsense is this? It'd be pretty hard for directors to work together, like you said, I guess.
I tried to do it once and got punished for it. That was because I did it with the guy who was my mentor. Working together as a director with a guy who's your mentor, that's crazy hard. It really was hell. Neither of us wanted to listen to the other, but it was like master and student, right? So when he went to the restroom, I'd try to sneak in some edits.
もう二度とやりたくない。
I never want to do that again. Guillermo del Toro really is a good guy. He's even come 2 or 3 times to Production IG. but every time he comes, it seems like he's gotten bigger. I hadn't seen him in a while until I met him in the game.
He appears in Death Stranding, right?
結構いい役だったね。
Yeah, and he has a pretty good role. But back to the question at hand. Why don't you make a movie?
撮りたかったんですけど、今はもう時間がない。
I've been wanting to make one, but I don't have any time. I might be able to do just a screenplay.
There are movies that can be filmed in a week.
Yeah, I was working on a short story project, but that didn't see the light of day. A week, huh? But there'll be a lot of prep work.
It really depends on the type of movie.
If we did a movie with just 3 people in a tiny room, it might work.
There's a better way to go about it than that. I've made a few movies with only 2 characters, but the key isn't reducing the number of characters. It's reducing the filming locations. With what's going on in the world right now, I've been thinking about this quite a bit. If you want to make a movie, then I'm open to discussing it at any time.
でも、押井さんプロデューサーがいて。
If you'll be the producer, yes.
I've never done real producer work, but I think I would want to do everything. That's the difficult part, I guess.
Oh, I get that.
No, I really shouldn't. I'm not suited to being a producer.
I really wanted to do it all myself, seriously. If I could just make clones of myself, I would. There's a novel from a long time ago called The Technicolor Time Machine or something like that, and in it, they travel back in time to make a movie. And they filmed the movie there in the past, but time flows differently in the past and the present. In the past, a year has gone by, but in the present, only 10 minutes have gone by. If I could use that technique, I could do everything myself.
ナルト方式だよね。分身の術。
Like Naruto, you need to train to be able to clone yourself.
We really have gone quite a bit overtime here. We didn't even have the chance to address the 3D scans for Death Stranding, but we will have to shelf that.
次回作。
Oh, you're right. Next time, perhaps.
Oh, that's right. I'd be willing to do that anytime.
Really? Then when that happens, you should join us for another talk session. Maybe then the 2 of you will be making plans to make a movie together or producing something.
アニメはどうぞ。
What about an anime? It's all CG now, isn't it?
CG は実は
I'm not a huge fan of CG. I guess it's good for getting things done quickly. Now we're at a point where we have no choice but to use CG, though. Everything has to be hybrid. But I think if we were to work on something together, an anime would be great.
なんかありませんか？
Do you have anything you want to promote?
Well, I do, but if I talk about it, somebody, that staff that's here in the studio with me today, will get annoyed at me. I really want to talk about it, though, so it's really hard to keep my mouth shut.
We'll post a link to your website in the description of this podcast episode. When what you're not able to talk about is finally released, people can learn about it there. And there we have it. 2 episodes in a row featuring director Mamoru Oshii as our guest. Thank you so much for coming here today.
もうこんな面白い番組ないんじゃないですかね。
This really is an interesting show, right?
いや他は実はさ、ファントムペインに関しては
Ah, I also wanted to talk a lot about Phantom Pain, but I didn't.
Let's talk about that next time then.
All right then, it's settled. Thank you so much again, Director Oshii.
どうもお疲れ様でした。
Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you.
はい、さて早くもエンディングのお時間です。
It's time to wrap up today's episode. That went by really fast, didn't it?
What was it like to see Director Oshii again after 6 years?
It didn't really feel like much time has passed. I was glad to see that he was still doing well. I hadn't seen him at all during the pandemic, so I was a bit worried. We actually talked a bit about the current situation before the recording, but not on air at all. I really respect Mr. Oshii as a creator, but as a person too. I've known him for 26 years and owe him for a number of things. Thanks to this show, I was able to meet with him again. I think we were both not sure if we should be sending each other emails and stuff during the pandemic, so we stayed low contact. But thanks to this show, we were finally able to meet again, so I'm really grateful.
Do you think we'll record another episode with Mr. Oshii?
大事なのあるんじゃないですかね。
I think so. He said he wanted to talk about the phantom pain.
I think fans will expect a collaboration from the two of you.
True. We haven't made it happen in 26 years, but it'd be great if we could get something together.
If you end up making something together, everyone on the show will have heard the very first conversation that led to the project. That would make this a really important episode. Thank you so much, Mr. Kojima.
はい、ということで、
Of course. Thank you all for listening to Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure. We're looking forward to seeing you next time.
ではさようなら。
Hideo Kojima Presents Brain Structure is a production by Spotify Studios in association with Kojima Productions and Fam Inc. Brains, Kayleen Falls. Narrator, Owen Maki. Music, Silent Poets. Visual design, Mechikuro. Producer, Hiro Furuki. Director, Kohei Takizawa. Executive producer at Spotify, Asami Sekine. Special thanks to Kojima Productions, Ayako Terashima, Masafumi Chiba, Miki Suga, and Aki Saito. Hosted by Hideo Kojima.
Hi. Still listening? Wow, what a wonderful talk that was with Mr. Oshii. On the next episode, a certain someone connected us, so we got to sit down and chat with him. Here's a hint. Go back and listen to episode 2.
No.